Imagine lying on an operating table. Bright lights above you, machines nearby, people talking around you, someone places a mask over your face, or injects something into your IV. Then they tell you to relax. Maybe they ask you to count backward from 10. 10, 9, 8, and then you're somewhere else. Someone is saying your name. The surgery is over. 3 hours have passed. But to you, those 3 hours did not feel like 3 hours. They did not feel like 3 minutes. They did not even feel like 3 seconds. There was seemingly no waiting, no darkness, no empty room, no feeling of time slowly passing. One moment existed, and then another moment existed several hours later. So what happened in between? More importantly, where were you? Not your body. Your body never left the room, not your brain. Your brain continued functioning, your heart kept beating, your cells remained alive, but the continuous experience you normally call you seems to have vanished, and that makes anesthesia one of the strangest things modern medicine can do to a human being. General anesthesia is often described as being put to sleep, but that description is misleading. Anesthesia is not simply deep sleep. When you sleep normally, your brain moves through different stages. You dream, you shift positions, you respond to certain sounds, your brain continues creating experiences even when you're disconnected from the world around you. General anesthesia is different. Anesthetic drugs deliberately alter brain activity so that major surgery can happen without the normal conscious experience of what is happening. And strangely, scientists still do not completely understand every mechanism involved. Different anesthetics affect the nervous system in different ways. Some strengthen inhibitory signaling, others interfere with excitatory signaling. But one of the most important effects appears to involve communication. Your brain is made of billions of neurons constantly exchanging information. Different regions process sound, vision, memory, pain, emotion, movement, and awareness. When you're normally conscious, information can travel through large networks of the brain and interact in complicated ways. Under general anesthesia, those patterns can dramatically change. Some regions continue functioning. Sensory signals may still enter parts of the brain, but the large-scale communication needed to create your normal unified experience becomes disrupted. Think about an orchestra. Every musician might still have an instrument. Some might even continue playing. But if they can no longer hear one another or follow the same conductor, the symphony disappears. Something similar may happen to consciousness. The brain does not necessarily become silent, it becomes different. And this leads to an important realization. Your brain can be extremely active without producing the experience you're having right now. Activity alone is not enough. Somehow, certain kinds of activity have to be organized in certain ways for a conscious world to appear right now. You can see, you can hear, you can think you know that you exist. Your brain has taken electrical and chemical activity and somehow turned it into this experience. But change that activity enough, and the world disappears. That is why anesthesiologists have to carefully control the drugs throughout an operation. General anesthesia is not one simple switch. It is a carefully managed state. Your breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen levels, and other signs are monitored while the anesthetic is maintained. Then, when the procedure is finished, the anesthetic drugs are stopped or reduced, and eventually something extraordinary happens. The world comes back. But here is where things become strange. Imagine going under anesthesia at 1 in the afternoon. Your next clear memory happens at 4. Everyone else experienced those 3 hours. The surgeons did, the nurses did, someone probably ate lunch, cars moved outside, messages arrived on your phone, thousands of things happened. But from your point of view, 1 and 4 can feel almost connected. There is no sensation of traveling across those 3 hours. And this exposes something strange about time. Maybe the feeling that time passes depends on consciousness being there to experience change. When you're awake, one event follows another. A sound happens, then a thought, then a movement, then another sound. Your brain forms memories connecting these moments together. That creates the feeling of continuity. But remove the experience and memory of those events, and the gap can collapse. 3 hours can feel like nothing. In principle, if you experienced no remembered consciousness during a much longer gap, the subjective jump could still feel immediate. And this is one reason anesthesia can feel more mysterious than sleep. When you wake from normal sleep, you often have some sense that time passed. Maybe you remember a dream. Maybe you woke briefly during the night. Maybe you remember turning over. But after some experiences of general anesthesia, there can simply be a missing piece. Except even that description may be too simple, because some people do report dreams associated with anesthesia. Researchers distinguish between different possible states. There can be unconsciousness with no reported experience. There can also be what researchers sometimes call disconnected consciousness. You may be having an internal experience like a dream without being consciously connected to the operating room. And then there is another possibility, connected consciousness. Awareness of something actually happening around you. This brings us to one of the most frightening questions people have about anesthesia. Can you wake up during surgery? The answer is yes, but it is rare. This is known as anesthesia awareness. A patient may later remember sounds, sensations, voices, pressure, or events from the operation. Popular culture often imagines the worst possible version of this. Someone completely awake, unable to move, experiencing everything. That can happen, but anesthesia awareness does not always look like that, and awareness does not automatically mean that the person experienced pain. Still, the fact that awareness can happen tells us something important. Consciousness is not necessarily a perfect on or off switch. There can be strange states between normal wakefulness and complete unconsciousness. You might be unable to respond while some conscious experience remains. You might experience something internally while completely disconnected from the outside world. You might process information without later remembering it. And this creates a problem for scientists. How do you prove that someone is unconscious? Think about that question. If someone opens their eyes and speaks to you, consciousness seems obvious. But if someone does not move, does not speak, does not respond, what exactly does that prove? It proves that they are not responding. It does not automatically tell you whether absolutely nothing is being experienced inside their mind. This is one reason anesthesia has become so important to consciousness research. Scientists can observe what happens to brain activity as someone moves from wakefulness into anesthesia and then returns. They can measure electrical activity, they can study communication between brain networks, they can compare anesthesia with sleep, coma, and other altered states. And somewhere inside all of those changes may be clues to one of science's biggest unanswered questions. Why are we conscious at all? We understand many things the brain does. We know certain regions are important for vision, others are important for hearing, others contribute to memory, movement, emotion, and language. But knowing how information is processed is not quite the same thing as explaining why processing information feels like something. Why does seeing the color red produce an experience? Why does pain hurt? Why does music sound like anything? Why aren't all of these processes simply happening mechanically in darkness? And anesthesia makes this mystery impossible to ignore. Because a relatively small amount of a chemical can enter your body, reach your brain, change the way neurons communicate, and apparently remove an entire universe, your universe. The operating room still exists. The doctors still exist. Time continues moving. Your brain remains physically present, but your conscious world may no longer be available to you. Then the drugs wear off. Brain activity reorganizes. Communication begins returning, and suddenly, there you are again. That raises a disturbing philosophical question. Are you the same continuous observer who existed before anesthesia? Most people would obviously say yes. You have the same body, the same brain, the same memories, the same name, the same history. But from your own perspective, there may have been no experienced bridge connecting the person before anesthesia to the person who woke afterward. Imagine consciousness as a movie. Normally, every frame flows into the next. Anesthesia appears to cut a section out of the film. The movie plays until one moment. Then it jumps forward, but you never see the missing frames. Now take that idea further. Every night, consciousness changes during sleep. People can lose consciousness after injuries. Certain seizures can disrupt awareness, drugs can alter it. Brain damage can change personality, memory can disappear while other abilities remain. All of this suggests that the feeling of being one permanent, continuous self may depend more heavily on the brain than it feels like it does. You feel continuous because your memories connect yesterday to today. Your personality remains relatively stable. Your brain constantly updates the story of who you are. But anesthesia reveals just how easily that continuity can be interrupted, and perhaps the strangest part is how little this usually bothers us. Someone tells us we were unconscious for 3 hours. We accept it. We get dressed. We go home. Eventually, we continue with our lives. But think about what actually happened. From the perspective of everyone around you. You existed throughout the entire operation. From your own perspective, a section of reality may simply be missing. There was a world before it. There was a world after it. And whatever happened to your subjective experience between those two moments may have left absolutely no memory behind. Maybe there was truly no conscious experience. Maybe there were brief internal experiences that vanished before they could become lasting memories. Maybe consciousness is not as simple as present or absent. Researchers are still trying to understand exactly where those boundaries lie, but anesthesia has already taught us something profound. Consciousness is surprisingly fragile. The entire world you experience depends on biological processes happening inside your brain. Change those processes in the right way, and your access to that world disappears. Restore them, and the world returns. Which leaves us with one final question. The next time someone goes under anesthesia, their body remains right there. Their brain remains right there. Their life continues moving forward. But if consciousness disappears, and hours later, consciousness returns, what exactly happened to the person experiencing it all? Maybe nothing went anywhere. Maybe consciousness is simply something the brain does when the right conditions exist. When those conditions stop, the experience stops. When they return, the experience begins again. But if that is true, then perhaps the question is not, where do you go under anesthesia? Maybe the stranger question is, what is the you that disappears?